Hi everybody, my name is Ian Sharp. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on the ATIS Open RAN Minimum Viable Profile, or MVP. I am a Principal Technologist in ATIS and I will be the moderator for the webinar today. If we go to the agenda slide, please. So thank you for joining. I'm pleased to also be joined by Ojas Chotsky, who has many years of involvement in the cutting edge issues of mobile technology, both at mobile network operators and at vendors. Ojas was the principal technologist during the MVP development, and he will share with us today his insights that he gleaned during the process. So to set the agenda, I will start with some high-level background on the project, and then hand over to Ojas to do a deeper dive, and we will end with a Q&A session. So you can ask questions at any time during the event using the Q&A tool on the webinar, and we will take the questions after the presentation at the end of the day. We will be providing registered participants with the slides and a replay for the event. So you don't need to explicitly ask for those. We'll get them out to everybody. And we're expecting today's event will be about 40 to 45 minutes, depending on the Q&A. So hopefully that gives you a line of what to expect. Let's go to the next slide, please. So many of you will of course know ATIS, but I think it's worth a quick introduction perhaps for some people that may not. So ATIS is one of the leading North American standards development organizations in the ICT sector. We have a wide-ranging set of members from many different parts of industry, as well as good contacts and membership from North American governments. ATIS is deeply involved in mobile standards and is the North American organizational partner in 3GPP. So we represent North American interests in that organization. And the overall goal of ATIS is to create standards that enable interoperable solutions to advance innovative approaches and the adoption of new technology. And as we will see, the MVP fits right into this brief. Next slide, please. So to start with, I'd like to sort of perhaps introduce the MVP in one sentence. So the MVP is a project that started in ATIS last year, and it came from an intersecting desire of NTIA, the government department, and the North American mobile operators, the MNOs, to expand and strengthen the trusted wireless equipment supply chain, particularly in areas that meet the very specific requirements of mobile network operators. So this was our kind of brief going into this. Next slide, please. So I think you may be kind of wondering what is the NTIA connection here. I guess I can try and reflect what we understand from ATIS through a lot of discussions that we've had with NTIA in the process. So what the NTIA observes is that the 5G RAN market has become very concentrated, and there are certain vendors in that list of 5G RAN vendors that are considered serious security threats. So NTIA see an opportunity in Open RAN to create a new paradigm to diversify the 5G supply chain. And over the last few years, there has been significant progress made developing and specifying Open RAN standards. But there is still a lot of options and a lot of different choices to be made in how you implement those standards. And in order to create the kind of supplier diversity that NTIA is looking for, it's helpful for new suppliers to have insights into what the MNO requirements are. And the idea behind the MVP is to help fill that gap. Next slide, please. So we identified 4 main facets that we are targeting here. Firstly, I mean, our overall goal is to stimulate the Open RAN market. We stimulate supply diversity by identifying a set of requirements that MNOs need and require as part of their deployment. We facilitate interoperability by listing features that are optional in the specs, but are common requirements for MNOs. And this will improve out-of-the-box compatibility between different implementations. We accelerate deployment by defining performance requirements to meet the commercial real-world needs of MNOs in their networks. And lastly, we provide an impetus for innovation by stimulating supply diversity and interoperability, as well as defining an extensible baseline architecture for a carrier-suitable Open RAN. So with that as an introduction, I think we can go to the next slide. I will hand you over to Ojas, who will talk us through more of the technical details behind the project. Over to you, Ojas.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning to all the folks from North America, and afternoon for folks who might be joining internationally. I'm going to, on today's webinar, I'm going to give a little bit of a color in terms of peeling sort of the onion, so to speak, in terms of what transpired, how things came about a little bit, what kind of content has been covered, why it has been covered, etc. Again, given the content, the detailed content of the MVP, I don't think we'll have the time to go through in detail every aspect, but I would like to at least leave you with some background in terms of where some of this stuff came from. And we'll be happy to provide answers to any questions that may have following the presentation. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so before we get into the actual MVP content, I wanted to at least give a little bit of insight into various milestones and how this MVP initiative came about, right? So as Ian pointed out, I think there were some discussions between NTIA and the MNOs and other ecosystem vendors in late 2023. Although the standards had been maturing from an Open RAN perspective, I think they quickly realized that what was missing from a perspective of diversifying the supply chain was providing visibility into the MNO needs. And this MVP is an effort to provide that visibility to new entrants who could then develop Open RAN products targeted for the North American market. So in early January or early 2024, ATIS's MNO members reached out to ATIS to kick off this initiative. Again, there are many reasons for coming to ATIS, right? ATIS has a very broad and diverse membership spanning MNOs and system vendors. ATIS has been a trusted partner on industry-leading initiatives, strategic initiatives such as the NextG Alliance for 6G. ATIS is also a 3GPP organizational partner, well-versed with 3GPP specifications. And finally, ATIS already had an established MOU with the O-RAN Alliance. So once the proposal was put forth and approved by the ATIS board, ATIS leadership worked with MNOs and NTIA to develop the goals, the scope, and the schedule for the delivery of the MVP. Once that was finalized, invitations were sent out to the participants for this initiative, and the initiative was kicked off in March. Between March and December, there were weekly meetings held by the working group. So initially, the goal was to come up with an MVP that covers all of the objectives in September-October timeframe. But as the group started having discussions in March and April, it became clear that the amount of work that needs to be done is pretty extensive. And what we did was we broke up the deliverable into two components. We delivered the version 1, which encapsulated the architectural requirements, the functional requirements, performance metrics, as well as the security requirements. And that was published in September of last year. The group continued to work on the interface requirements and the selection of a subset of IoT profiles with respect to the various interfaces that were identified as part of the baseline architecture. They continued that work from September until December, which resulted in version 2.0. So think of version 2.0 as a continuation of version 1.0, where version 1.0 document has been supplemented with interface requirements. Uh, Again, it was a pretty intense activity. We held weekly meetings for the entire 7 months, or I would say 9 months. It didn't matter whether it was a holiday week, it was a 3GPP meeting week, or a ORAN meeting week. I mean, there was a broad participation, and we continue to meet every week to make sure we get to the finish line for the deliverable of this version 2.0 towards the end of December of 2024. We go to the next slide. So that gives you a little bit of clarity around how this initiative came about and what the key milestones were. So I mentioned there were ATIS worked with MNOs and NTIA to finalize the goals and the scope and the schedule for this. So I gave you the schedule. So what are the goals and the scope that were identified, right? So in terms of the goals, the main goal really was to identify a set of technical requirements common across all MNOs to develop, integrate, and simplify baseline Open RAN solutions to provide visibility into the MNO current need, as well as near future needs. And what I mean by near future is really 18 to 24 months out. So it was not about just what they have currently deployed as part of their radio deployment, but also what they are considering for deployment 18 to 24 months out. The third key aspect or the guideline, I would say, for this initiative was that we were not going to capture requirements for which the specifications are not clearly specified. I mean, we didn't want to create, I think that would cause confusion in terms of proprietary implementation and interoperability, right? So the goal was to align the requirements and the capabilities that are identified with the specifications that have been developed across different standards bodies such as 3GPP, ORAN, SCF, etc. In terms of the scope, again, the scope included definition of the baseline architecture, what functions should be part of the baseline Open RAN solution that MNOs are likely to deploy, what interfaces are they looking to deploy, what feature and functional capabilities should be part of those baseline network or architectural elements and the associated interfaces. What are the performance metrics that MNOs typically consider for any RAN product for commercial deployment, as well as some of the interface requirements to facilitate interoperability and multi-vendor deployment. Next slide. So who were the participants? As you can see, we had all the MNOs from US participating and contributing towards the MVP. In terms of vendors, we had a very broad ecosystem of system vendors participating, spanning radio hardware, radio software, as well as the cloud infrastructure. We also had government entities kind of participating as well. They are for most part, they were observing how the MVP was evolving, and when necessary, providing guidance so that we can prioritize activity in terms of the deliverables that were laid out for this initiative. Again, the participation was by invitation. given the aggressive schedule that was outlined or provided to the group for this initiative, the participation was by invitation to maintain a small and effective working group. But again, it was broad enough to cover all aspects of an Open RAN solution that would be deployed by the MNOs. Next slide. So before we get into the content, so what are the potential uses of this MVP by various stakeholders? So we provide like 3 illustrative uses on the right side. On the left side, I think we already talked about, Ian also talked about this. We are going to focus on existing specifications, trying to identify optional requirements that are optional from a specification perspective, but are really required by the MNOs. Some of the requirements, optional requirements, they are either already deployed or are currently deployed or are wanting to deploy over the next 18 to 24 months. On the right side, I think we are illustrating 3 different potential uses of this MVP. One is obviously by Open RAN product vendors. They can use that as an input into their product development for the MNOs. It can also be used by the operators themselves for internal integration testing as well as procurement by incorporating that into the RFP process. And finally, it can also be used by test equipment vendors and test labs to develop automated test suites. And there could be other stakeholders such as open source community. They can leverage that to prioritize the roadmap for their feature functional development for the open source software. You could have system integrators take a look at that and build tools and capabilities leveraging the requirements identified as part of the MVP. Okay, next slide. So again, the MVP, so what does the MVP contain? So MVP contains a set of requirements spanning architecture, the baseline architecture, feature and functional capabilities that need to be supported over that baseline architecture, performance metrics and associated value ranges for those metrics, security requirements, as well as interface requirements. And on the right side, it's probably a very small font, but you can see the table of content over there. There are like 54 pages in overall, about 40 plus pages of very detailed requirements spanning all of these different categories. So it's a pretty exhaustive work that was taken up. It took us a little bit extra effort beyond the original target of September, October, but I think when you look at this content, I think it's a pretty impressive set of requirements that have been gathered and made publicly available. So if you haven't already downloaded the MVP, I encourage everyone to go to the website and download this document and go through the various requirements in detail. And again, if you see any errors or something, if you have to provide feedback, feel free to do that to us as well. The link is provided on the link over there. The email address is provided on the link itself. So now let's step into each of those sections of the MVP. So what was the baseline architecture? So the baseline architecture was pretty much well aligned with what's there as part of the ORAN Alliance architecture. So baseline architecture includes ORUs, ODUs, OCU, both the control plane and the user plane. It includes the SMO along with the non-real-time RIC framework, as well as the OCloud, and all of the associated interfaces with those architectural elements. One thing that's not part of the current MVP, and I'll talk a little bit about that, is the near real-time RIC, which is kind of shown as a dotted grayed out box over there. And I'll talk a little bit about why it's not there in the current MVP. So at the onset, given where we are in terms of 5G deployment, all of the operators, and there was a general consensus that we should focus on on standalone 5G standalone deployment using outdoor macro and microcells. So, I mean, there are many different verticals. Each vertical may have a very unique set of requirements. For example, enterprise deployment may have a different set of requirements than, say, a wide area mobile broadband deployment. Satellite vertical may have a very different set of requirements compared to, let's say, wide area deployment or even a private network deployment. So given the constraints in terms of the time constraints that we had, and the fact that the goal was to provide visibility into what the MNO needs are, it was decided to focus on the 5G SA deployment as part of this MVP development. There are two main areas we kind of focused on during the architectural discussions. One was around the RIC aspects. The other one was around the cloud aspects. So from a RIC aspect, all of the MNOs kind of were in general consensus that that the non-real-time RIC and the framework for RF should be part of the MVP, because they see a lot of innovative RFs that they would like to deploy over the next 18 to 24 months. There was also a general consensus actually from MNOs that although near real-time RIC is interesting, they were of the opinion that at least within the time frame that we are looking at, they didn't see any compelling XApps, etc., that would help them, that would require them to commercially deploy nationwide within the network. So everyone's kind of interested to see what it can do for them. So all of the operators are kind of monitoring all of the work that's being done, whether within academia or whether within research institutes or within the ORAN working groups. But it was decided, at least for this current version, in order to provide a fairly accurate view of what MNOs are looking at for the next 18 to 24 months, we should not include the near real-time RIC as part of the baseline architecture. With respect to OCloud, all of the operators generally agreed that it was fundamental for the enablement of RAN functions, because all of the RAN functionality is going to be software-based, and from their perspective, having OCloud to enable ODU and OCU, CP, OCU, UP, as well as SMO framework software-based components was critical for them to really have a successful Open RAN deployment. So to that end, OCloud is considered as part of the baseline architecture. People recognize that the O2 interface is still being developed. It may not be as mature as everyone would like, but the thought process was that including OCloud and O2 interface as part of the MVP will provide impetus to the respective ORAN working groups to progress the work in maturing the O2 interface. Next slide. So in terms of the functional and feature capabilities that are captured in the MVP, it includes a subset of radio access related feature and functional capabilities specified in 3GPP release 16 and 17. Again, there's a wide category of requirements that have been captured. As you can see over there, we have physical layer and RF related requirements such as channel bandwidth, subcarrier spacing, PRAJ formats, etc. We have a wide set of mobility requirements: idle state mobility, inactive state mobility, RRC connected mobility, mobility across RUs, mobility within RU, mobility across DUs, etc. So we have a very good, comprehensive set of mobility requirements captured, and that's always a critical part of any wide area deployment. In addition to that, we also have carrier aggregation and MIMO requirements. All of the MNOs have spectrum licenses across multiple bands. So carrier aggregation is extremely important. It identifies the number of component carriers they're expecting on the downlink, number of component carriers on the uplink, carrier aggregation within a single band, across bands, across TDD, FDD bands, and so on and so forth. So it's a pretty comprehensive set of requirements and guidance that's being provided. Same thing goes with MIMO. There are requirements for single user MIMO, multi-user MIMO using 6040, 64R radios, 32T, 32R radios, a variety of beamforming methods to be supported by those radios. And finally, I think that it also includes requirements related to some of the essential services, as well as we couldn't categorize a bunch of requirements. So there's a bunch of requirements under what we call the other or the miscellaneous category. So in terms of the essential service, we have requirements for WPS, which is wireless priority service, emergency alert service, voice over NR, EPS fallback for voice, etc. So there's a bunch of services specific requirements captured. Additionally, we have requirements under the miscellaneous umbrella for slicing, positioning, remote interference management, which is tied to mitigating the effect of atmospheric ducting, especially in TDD deployments. And then the second bullet, I think we also, so this is all about the radio access capabilities. The second aspect that is also captured under functional and feature is we also include a subset of OCloud and SMO requirements that have been specified as part of the ORAN Alliance specifications. So that gives you a broad overview of the kind of functional and feature requirements that have been captured in the MVP. Next slide. So the MVP also includes several performance metrics and value ranges associated with those performance metrics. It also includes references to test methods and configurations to verify those performance metrics, right? And in terms of the different categories of performance metrics, you can see it's a pretty comprehensive list that has been put together. We have accessibility metrics such as RRC, call success rate, retainability metrics such as RRC call drop rate, throughput metrics such as peak throughput, spectral efficiency, latency metrics such as call setup time, media round trip latency time, RF related requirements such as the ref sense to be met by the Open RAN system, capacity requirements in terms of every sector capacity, number of simultaneous RRC connections to be supported, availability metrics, as well as service specific metrics, specifically around voice over NR and web page download. Just to note, the value ranges are kind of, I think MNOs try to provide value ranges for as many performance metrics as they could, but some metrics such as average sector capacity, I think they're tied with the implementation, the link curve, etc. So obviously there was no way they could provide a guidance. So this is something for those performance metrics, I think they would probably evaluate after the product is available for their evaluation. Next slide, please. So in terms of security requirements, obviously we have security is extremely important for any multi-vendor deployment, right, of an Open RAN system. The security requirements have been captured for all of the architectural elements and the interfaces that have been identified as part of the baseline architecture, which includes ORU, ODU, OCU, OCloud, SMO, as well as the non-real-time RIC framework, which is kind of part of the SMO framework currently. In addition to for architectural element specific and interface specific requirements, there are a broad set of security requirements which are common across all of those architectural elements and interfaces, which have also been captured. And there is a third set of requirements. Those are kind of more guidance or references to best practices that have been developed by federal agencies for guidance in terms of Open RAN product development and deployment. Next slide, please. And as I said, so all of that stuff was already published, right, as part of version 1.0 in September. What's new is this new interface requirements that have been captured under section 10 of the MVP. And as you can see, it includes procedure-related requirements as well as functional requirements for some of those interfaces. And it's based on the July train of the ORAN specification. In terms of the interfaces, we have the M plane, the CUS plane, the O1 interface, the O2 interface, R1, as well as the F1 and the XN interface. For the M plane interface, it encompasses IoT profiles and requirements related to both hierarchical as well as hybrid interfaces. For the CUS plane, it encapsulates a subset of IoT profiles specified in ORAN, which are relevant for the North America MNOs. It also includes additional requirements for which there are no IoT profiles currently specified. For example, DMRS beamforming for uplink, aka ULPI. From a O1 interface perspective, again, all of the operators kind of thought operational aspects are very critical because it's not just the new features and capabilities, but the ability for the operators to operate and manage Open RAN system is critical. So for them, O1 interface and O2 interfaces are pretty critical. And there is a substantial number of requirements captured as part of those interfaces. And for the O1 interface, it encompasses procedures and requirements related to provisioning, performance management, fault management, trace management, physical network function, as well as cloudified network function management. O2 encompasses procedures related to deployment management service, DMS, as well as infrastructure management service, IMS. From an R1 perspective, it encompasses procedures related to both DME as well as SME. And finally, as for F1 and XN, it encapsulates the C-plane procedures that have been specified as part of 3GPP specifications and identified as part of the F1 and XN profile within the ORAN Alliance. So as you can see, I think our team spent quite a bit of effort on developing the interface requirements to facilitate interoperability and multi-vendor deployment. And if you look at the content, I mean, probably half of the document is probably focused on the interface requirements. Get the next slide. So this MVP version 2.0 is a culmination of a joint effort involving industry and government to diversify and strengthen the Open RAN supply chain for the North American market, Open RAN market. It captures RAN functionality that MNOs have deployed or are considering for deployment in the near future. It captures performance metrics that the MNOs need for commercial deployment considerations. It also captures a robust set of security requirements to facilitate multi-vendor deployment. It has a very strong set of interface requirements and has identified a subset of IoT profiles to facilitate interoperability. And it also includes a set of R1 interface requirements to facilitate innovation via RFs. So in summary, we do believe that this MVP is ready to be leveraged by the Open RAN ecosystem to accelerate interoperability, deployment, and facilitate innovation with Open RAN in North America. Next slide, I think. I think we got a very favorable feedback from the executives of the MNOs. So again, a lot of I would say a lot of appreciation should go to a lot of the MNO SMEs who contributed, who participate, as well as the SMEs for the system vendors who provided constructive feedback in making sure that we had a very good a document that that is true in terms of what the MNOs desire. At the same time, it's achievable in terms of what's specified and available from a specification perspective. And the last slide, I believe, is I guess we just provide the link. The mvp.atis.org is where you can find the document. You can download the document, and we are hopeful that you'll review and give us some feedback in terms of if there's a correction or if you see something that, again, keep in mind, team has been aggressively working. So obviously there are, in an endeavor such as this, there are always few things that could slip in, which may not be entirely correct. So we'll look for feedback from the community to see what further revisions we need to make on this. I think that was this last slide, and I believe yes. And so I'll hand it back to Ian for the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Otis. Thank you for a very informative presentation. As a reminder, you can raise questions to ask in the chat, or not in the chat, rather on the tool. So I guess we have a couple of questions, Otis, that we'd like to put to you. So I think you've given us a very comprehensive view of the hard work that went into creating this document in the first place. What are the next steps in evolving and maintaining the MVP?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's always going to be the next question, right? So I think from my perspective, I think we have gone through like an intense 9-month effort in identifying the needs of the MNO for the next 18 to 24 months, right? Period. A very comprehensive set of requirements have been identified and published as part of this MVP. So what we are now what we are trying to do is, I think it's kind of a pause in the sense that we are looking for feedback from the overall industry and the government with the goal of potentially identifying where we go with the next evolution of the MVP. And all of the folks, and I can vouch for them, everyone wanted a break. They wanted to detox a little bit from the weekly meetings that we were having. So this is kind of right now we are in a phase where we are going to collect feedback and see what we do next with it.
Okay, thank you. So I see a lot of questions on the web. Let me try and pick a couple of them. So I guess one question that comes up is, do we have a plan in terms of certification or conformance testing against the MVP?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what we have said previously, and I think ATIS probably does not do product certification, but there are labs that have been set up. There's the Orchid lab at Boost Mobile, and then there is the Code lab with AT&T Verizon, and there are other labs, OTIC labs. So our hope is that this MVP gets used as part of testing during those lab activities, and the equipment vendors do actually take into consideration the requirements that are specified and develop automated test suites to streamline the testing in those labs.
Okay, thank you. I think one question there, we're kind of entering the 6G era, of course, at least in terms of standards work. Do you think the MVP has relevance to 6G in any form?
I'm not quite sure from an MVP perspective, but I'm sure there will probably be some synergies across Open RAN and 6G. We have to wait and see how it plays out. I would kind of know that there is a joint workshop organized in April in France between the ORAN Alliance and 3GPP to precisely discuss these topics as to what's next as 3GPP embarks on developing specifications for 6G.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess the last question that I have coming in, you talked a bit about the near real-time RIC and the kind of current status of that, but what do you see as perhaps future opportunities to use that in mobile operators?
Yeah, I'm probably not, I'm going to probably speak at a personal level, right? Being a technologist. So I think there are two great opportunities for near real-time RIC NX apps, right? One is, I think, from an NTN perspective, so if we ever end up doing an NTN MVP for an NGSO constellation, the whole notion of dynamic resource management across different spot beams within a satellite and across satellite, I think that's a problem. That typical scheduler doesn't handle that. The one that gets developed for the NTN for the terrestrial deployments. So there are certain aspects that I believe the near real-time RIC can come into play from the perspective of NTN Open RAN deployments, specifically around NGSO constellation. And the second area is probably around the spectrum sharing and bandwidth exchange component, where you could think of a very glorified near real-time SAS, which coordinates spectrum across multiple players, so to speak. Again, the critical requirement for that would be a necessary condition would be adaptive infrastructure, both on the federal and the commercial side.
Yeah, and I just noticed we just had a question come in saying, does the MVP support satellite NTN? Well, the answer is currently it's driven by terrestrial MNO requirements, right? So that's where our focus is.
That is correct. I think right now, I think we did not consider. I think that's a completely different set of requirements. I mean, some of the MIMO requirements, the NTN doesn't support MIMO. The mobility requirements might be slightly different. And as I pointed out, there may be a need for the near real-time RIC to support dynamic resource management, etc. So I envision that to be probably it will leverage this MVP, but there probably should be a distinct MVP for satellite, I believe, because the requirements are sufficiently different to be captured that it would merit a standalone document on its own.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Ojas, for your sharing your insights today. I mean, I think this has been an immense effort by you personally and all the companies that contributed, and we very much welcome all the effort that's been put in by ATIS members and participants in this activity.
I'd like to really give a shout out to all the participants, right? I mean, some of them I do see some of them are on this call, but I mean, MNOs, especially MNO SMEs, they took bulk of the contribution activity, and then the ecosystem, so the system vendor SMEs then provided a robust collaboration around those contributions. So really, it's really more, I was just kind of trying to manage the schedule per se, but really all of the effort was really being put by the SMEs who were participating. And I will tell you that, I mean, we had a very broad representation, and for 80% of the meetings, we had representation by at least one SME from each participating company. So I think it was a pretty broad collaboration, so to speak.
Yeah, it was certainly very unique in my experience, the intensity of the work and the breadth of participation. So thank you very much, everybody who's been here today. Also the ATIS coordinators who ran all the technology and everything. As I mentioned in the introduction, we will make available the slides and the replay for registered participants, so you don't need to request that. And I think that then brings us to the end of the agenda. So thank you very much again, and we look forward to continuing to work on Open RAN and related topics in ATIS over the coming years. So thank you very much, everybody.
See you guys.